coconut oil was all the rage, is it still worth using?
Ooh, coconut oil is fascinating. So, there is a pretty good body of scientific literature showing that even though coconut oil is composed of highly saturated fat, that plant saturated fats in general don't impact our cardiovascular disease risk factors the same way that saturated fats do from animal foods. And that has to do with the length of the saturated fat. So, the types of saturated fats in coconut oil are called medium chain triglycerides. So they're a medium length fat, whereas we get more long chain saturated fats from animal foods like red meat. So with saturated fat, in general, studies show that provided our diet contains less than 10% of calories from saturated fat, that doesn't increase risk of cardiovascular disease. And then this is an interesting debate right now in the scientific literature on whether or not it's really a concern above 10% or if it's more like the overall eating patterns that, at more than 10% calories from saturated fat would happen in if it's those overall eating patterns that are the risk factor, and the other things that go along with those types of eating patterns, like a more sedentary lifestyle, higher stress, right? Not as much sleep. So if it's like this constellation of other factors that tend to correlate with that type of dietary pattern. But given that this is being debated, caution being the better part of valor, the better safe than sorry approach would be to limit saturated fats to 10%. Overall, there's more studies showing that coconut oil doesn't need to count towards that 10% that does, especially if it's extra virgin coconut oil. So that would be the coconut oil with all of the other cool nutrients that are like part of the oil fraction of coconut. So that would include some vitamin E, some really cool phytosterols, which are a class of phytonutrients that help lower cholesterol. So when you get all of those things together, you're getting something a little bit different than the refined isolated fat. So there's more studies showing that we don't need to count coconut oil towards our saturated fat intake than studies that show that we do. But again, caution being the better part of valor, it's best to mix up the types of fats we're consuming. I would not want to limit my olive oil consumption if I mean, unless I was allergic or really can't afford olive oil, that would be a different situation. But olive oil and avocado oil, extremely beneficial, heart healthy fats, oleic acid, which we're not getting very much of from coconut oil. So as long as they're not like displacing other really beneficial oils in our diet, I think using some coconut oil is fine. I've got certain recipes that I love to make that use coconut oil. But I wouldn't suggest that it is in any way a miracle food. And I certainly wouldn't go out of my way to add coconut oil to my diet, especially given the kind of mixed science on saturated fat intake.